You're watching Tailwire. Here, we tell the stories YouTube doesn't dare to share. If that moves you, hit subscribe and leave a like. It helps us keep going. Now take a deep breath and get ready. What you're about to hear will touch your soul.
That was the headline. Black letters on white. Cold, final, brutal. It hit the world like a slap. By the time the morning sun lit St. Peter's Square, the news had already circled the globe. A man in Ohio had been arrested during a late-night sting. Cocaine. Small quantities. Enough for a felony. Nothing new in the news cycle until he spoke. At the police station, when asked if he had anyone to call, he had said one name. "My cousin, Robert." "Robert who?" "Robert Callahan," he answered. "You know, Pope Leo XIV. The officers laughed. Then they searched. And stopped laughing. The fingerprints matched a man named Michael Callahan. Born in Detroit. Raised in Michigan. Same street. Same house. Same grandmother. News outlets swarmed the neighborhood before dawn. Old neighbors pulled out yearbooks. A childhood friend held up a faded photo for the camera. Two boys, barefoot in the yard, one holding a football, the other with his arm around him. The caption read, "Me and Robbie Summer, 83. Inside the Apostolic Palace, silence held the air like fog. Pope Leo XIV sat alone in his private study. The TV was muted, but the images were enough. A police mugshot, disheveled hair, a swollen lip. Behind that battered face, Robert saw the boy he once called his best friend. The cousin who shared his toys, his food, his secrets. His only family. He reached slowly for a drawer in the corner of the room. Inside it was a box no one else touched. He opened it. Photographs. Not the official ones. The real ones. A creek behind their childhood home. A birthday cake with one candle too many. A blurry shot of two boys sitting in a pew, their legs swinging off the edge. He hadn't looked at them in years. Now, they looked back at him like ghosts. The Vatican phones rang non-stop. Aides rushed in and out with papers, statements, options. Some wanted an immediate response. Others suggested silence. One cardinal whispered, "This could break everything." But the Pope said nothing. He simply stood, walked to the balcony window, and closed it. Down in the square, tourists still took selfies. Pilgrims waited for the noon blessing. But inside those ancient walls, a storm was beginning to brew. Across the world, the media tore into the story like wolves. Drug trafficker linked to the Holy See. Blood ties, the Pope's hidden past. From Detroit to the Vatican II roads, one family. Every hour brought a new detail. Every station ran the footage. And still, no comment from Rome. In the silence, speculation grew. Was the Pope hiding something? Did he know where his cousin had been all these years? Would he condemn him? Defend him? Acknowledge him at all? Inside, Robert paced alone. He held one photo in his hands. It was the two of them 8 years old, heads bowed in prayer before their first communion. Michael wore a hand-me-down suit. Robert had polished his cousin's shoes the night before. He remembered that night. They had slept on the floor. They had talked about heaven. And they had made a promise. To never forget who we are. He closed his eyes. Then whispered to the quiet. "I didn't forget you, Mikey. I just didn't look." The Vatican's press office released nothing. No denial. No acknowledgement. Only silence. And in that silence, the world began to scream. Some called it a scandal. Others called it sabotage. Every news anchor, every headline, every whisper seemed louder inside the marble walls of Rome. Pope Leo XIV continued his schedule, as if the earth hadn't shifted beneath his feet. He met with diplomats, blessed pilgrims, received 2 nuns from South Sudan with warmth and reverence. But his eyes, they weren't there. Behind every handshake, he saw that photo. Behind every smile, he heard that name. Michael. The staff around him grew nervous. Some had never seen him so quiet, so still. Cardinal Visconti, older now, his back curved by age and duty, stepped into the papal study without knocking. You haven't said a word." The Pope nodded, but did not look up. "They're calling it a crisis," the cardinal added. "It's not," Robert answered quietly. "It's a consequence." The old man sighed and sat. "They want a statement. Some want a separation." "Separation?" "They want you to denounce him. Officially. Publicly. Say you haven't seen him in decades. That you're ashamed." Robert turned. "I'm not ashamed of him." "You should be," the cardinal whispered. Robert didn't answer. He looked down at the letter in his hands. It had arrived that morning, buried in a pile of formal correspondence. No return address, no title. Only 6 words written in shaky penmanship. "He was always proud of you." There was no signature, but Robert knew the handwriting. It was his aunt's. Michael's mother. The woman who raised them both when his own parents died. He hadn't heard from her in 20 years. "She knew this would happen," he said. The cardinal looked puzzled. "She once told me," Robert continued, "if you rise too high, Robbie, they'll come for your roots." He folded the letter slowly, carefully, like something sacred. The sun outside was beginning to dim. In the square below, pilgrims continued their rituals. But among them, protesters had begun to appear. Signs. Chants. Some demanded truth. Others demanded blood. By nightfall, the Vatican gates were lined with reporters. Cameras pointed at every window. Every whisper that escaped the walls was amplified, twisted, projected across screens from Rome to New York to Manila. Inside, the College of Cardinals held a private session. Some demanded discipline. Others feared fallout. A few spoke in whispers about the Callahan bloodline. That maybe the Pope was not so distant from sin after all. Robert did not attend. He remained in the chapel, alone, hands clasped, knees aching. He had read Psalm 51 7 times. "Have mercy on me, O God, according to your unfailing love." But what gnawed at him was not guilt. It was the memory of the last time he heard Michael laugh. They were 17, sitting on the roof of their uncle's house, legs swinging over the edge, the city lights of Detroit in the distance. They had made sandwiches with nothing but ketchup and old bread. Michael had said, "One day you'll be wearing a golden robe, and I'll be watching from the gutter." Robert had thrown a piece of bread at him and said, "Don't be dramatic." Michael just smiled. And now, decades later, he wasn't smiling anymore. He was in prison, and Robert was wearing white and gold. The irony wasn't lost on him. But irony doesn't protect a child from shame. And the headlines had already reached the ears of children around the world. A young seminarian from Nigeria wrote in a letter, "Holy Father, they say your cousin is a criminal. Does that make you one too?" Another wrote, "My parents stopped going to Mass. They say the Pope's house is dirty." That night, Robert stood by the window of his private residence. The moon lit the domes of Rome in silver. His reflection stared back at him. He whispered, "I gave my life to God, but he never asked me to give up my family." Behind him, a crucifix hung in shadow. He turned, looked at the figure nailed to wood. "I know justice," he said softly. But what does mercy look like when the world demands a show? He didn't sleep that night. He wrote nothing, spoke to no one. But early the next morning, a request was sent to the U.S. Department of Justice. No cameras, no press. It was handwritten by the Pope himself. It read, "If permitted, I would like to visit the prisoner. Alone. Not as Pope, as his cousin. Before he was Pope, he was just Robbie." Long before white robes and marble halls, there was a small 2-bedroom house on the east side of Detroit. The paint peeled, the floor creaked, the porch sagged. But inside, it held the weight of a dozen memories stitched into every beam. Robert and Michael shared the back room. 2 mattresses on the floor, 1 lamp between them. The wallpaper was torn in the corners, the window never closed properly. In winter, they taped plastic over the glass to keep the cold out. They didn't care. They were kids. They built forts out of bed sheets, traded baseball cards, argued about superheroes, and fell asleep mid-sentence. Every Sunday they walked to St. Agnes Parish with their aunt. She made them wear stiff shirts and shiny shoes that hurt their toes. Michael always tried to sneak out with his shirt untucked. Robert would fix it at the door. "You'll never be a priest if you show up wrinkled," he'd tease. Michael would roll his eyes and grin. "Good thing I'm going to be rich instead." They called each other Robbie and Mikey. They were cousins by blood. But in every way that mattered, they were brothers. Their aunt worked 2 jobs. She left notes on the fridge in cursive they could barely read. Chicken in the oven. Homework first. Don't fight. They fought anyway. Over cereal. Over TV. Over who got the last clean towel. But when the lights went out, when the city outside roared with sirens or silence, they reached across the space between the beds and tapped fingers against the lamp's base. 3 taps meant, "Still here." One night, when they were 9, Michael came home with a split lip. Some kids had pushed him down for being too loud. He didn't cry. He just sat on the porch with clenched fists and shaking shoulders. Robert brought him a popsicle and didn't say a word. The next day, they skipped school and wandered downtown, pockets full of nothing. They sat on the steps of an old church, feeding pigeons crusts of bread they had taken from the cafeteria. "I wish we lived somewhere else," Michael said. "Like where?" "Anywhere. Somewhere people don't look at you like you already did something wrong." Robert nodded, not fully understanding, but feeling it anyway. Years passed. Robert found a calling early. He loved the sound of scripture, the way the priest's voice rose like music. He joined a youth group, took notes during homilies, memorized psalms like poetry. Michael drifted. He skipped class more often, picked fights with boys twice his size, started spending time with older kids who wore leather jackets and whispered about money. Still, at night, he came home. And still, they tapped the lamp. When they were 16, Robert was accepted into a seminary program in New York. The night before he left, they stayed up late on the roof. Michael passed him a soda and said, "You really gonna wear one of those collars for the rest of your life?" Robert shrugged. "Feels like the right thing." Michael laughed. "You were always the good one." "No, I just never got tired of believing something good would come." Michael grew quiet. "You're leaving, Robbie. I'll be here. I'll come back." But he didn't. Not really. The calls grew fewer. The letters stopped. And by the time Robert was ordained, Michael had already disappeared from every address he'd known. No one talked about it. People said he moved. Others said worse. But late at night, in the quiet of his first parish room, Robert sometimes reached toward the lamp on his nightstand and tapped 3 times. Still here. No answer ever came. Years turned into decades. The world changed. Robert rose, from parish to bishop, from bishop to Rome, and then, by what many called a miracle, to the chair of St. Peter. But the little house in Detroit was still there. Abandoned now, overgrown. The porch had collapsed, the wallpaper long gone. And yet in his dreams, the window was still open, and the tap still echoed in the dark. When the letters stopped, Robert didn't notice right away. The first few weeks at seminary were filled with readings, Latin phrases he didn't understand, long prayers at dawn, and the heavy hush of other boys trying to become men of God. Everything was quiet, orderly. Every action had purpose. Every sound had weight. But one night, just after Christmas, Robert sat on the edge of his bed and reached for a letter he had written a week earlier. It had come back unopened. The envelope was still sealed, stamped in red. Return to sender. Address unknown. He stared at it for a long time. He wrote again. Sent it to his aunt's old job. Nothing. He tried calling, but the line rang into nowhere. Then he stopped trying. Not because he stopped caring, because caring had started to hurt. Years passed. Robert became Father Callahan. He ministered to soldiers and addicts, baptized babies, buried the lost. He gave sermons with a voice that could break a room into tears and listened to confessions that crushed the air. But in the dark, when no one watched, he would still tap the lamp beside his bed. 3 taps. Still here. No answer. Once during a mission trip in Chicago, he thought he saw him across the street, leaning against a brick wall, head down, hoodie pulled low. The face was older, thinner, but the eyes. Robert ran into traffic, heart pounding. But by the time he reached the other side, the man was gone. In Rome, they gave him titles. Then robes. Then silence. He became archbishop. Then cardinal. And finally, pope. They called it destiny. He called it survival. Because deep inside, where no one could see, he carried the guilt of having risen while Michael had disappeared. Somewhere along the way, he had convinced himself that Michael didn't want to be found. That perhaps his cousin had chosen the streets over the altar. That maybe the pain was mutual. Until the mug shot. Until the headline. Until the face on the screen brought the roof crashing down over 30 years of silence. Michael Callahan. Trafficking. Handcuffed. Eyes tired. Mouth closed. And for the first time in decades, Robert didn't feel holy. He felt 17 again. On the roof. Under the stars. Eating ketchup sandwiches and talking about heaven. That night, alone in his papal chambers, he returned to the box where he had stored what little remained of that past life. A baseball card. A friendship bracelet made of yarn. A photo of them at Halloween, dressed as saints, laughing too hard to keep their halos straight. And beneath all of it, a drawing. It was a crayon sketch of their bedroom. 2 beds, 1 lamp, and a red line connecting both hands from each bed 3 little dots between them. 3 taps. Still here. He didn't cry. But he didn't sleep either. He read the court reports. Michael had no prior felonies. Had dropped out of school at 18. Had worked at a warehouse. Then vanished. No drug empire. No weapons. Just 3 controlled buys and 1 confession. The investigators called it small time. The media called it shameful. The church called it sensitive. But Robert called it familiar. Because he knew the boy who would rather take a beating than let someone else go hungry. He knew the boy who once stole a box of crayon snot for graffiti, but to finish his cousin's birthday card. He knew the boy who never missed Mass, even when he stopped believing. And now that boy was in chains. For weeks, Robert said nothing. Not to his aides, not to the press, not even to God. Because what do you say to the silence that grew so large? You don't know where to start? But then the letters came again. From children. From prisoners. From tired priests with trembling hands. One wrote, "If your cousin is guilty, does that mean you are too?" Another asked, "Would Jesus still speak to him?" That last question stayed. It stayed through morning mass, through meetings with world leaders, through midnight walks in the gardens. Until finally, the Pope opened a drawer, took out a sheet of paper, and wrote 12 words. If allowed, I will visit the prisoner, not as Pope, as blood. He sealed it, breathed deeply, and whispered toward the quiet. "Mikey, I see you." The storm outside the Vatican walls had grown into a hurricane. Headlines morphed into accusations. Talk shows turned into trials. And news anchors spoke his name as if it carried the weight of sin itself. Pope Leo XIV, spiritual leader of over 1 billion Catholics, has yet to denounce his cousin's criminal activity. He's either protecting him or hiding something worse. Social media poured gasoline on the fire. Clips of the Pope hugging children, washing feet, praying for the sick, all now edited with ominous music and captions like, "What else is he hiding? Saint or sinner? Blood doesn't lie." In America, political commentators took sides. Some called for his resignation. Others mocked the church as a relic of corruption. A few defended him, but their voices were drowned in the flood. The Vatican press office issued 3 statements. All short, all cold. The Holy See acknowledges the ongoing legal case involving a distant relative of His Holiness. The Pope has no involvement with the matter. But distance meant nothing now. They had photos, names, proof that Robert and Michael were not just cousins by blood, but brothers by upbringing. The damage had already been done. In churches from Mexico to Manila, attendance dropped. Some priests received hate mail. Others were spit on. A cathedral in France was vandalized with spray paint, drugs, blood, and gold. Inside the Curia, the College of Cardinals was in crisis. They gathered behind closed doors, whispered behind heavy curtains, argued under stained glass. Some demanded the Pope address the issue from the pulpit. Others feared a televised statement would only invite more questions. But one Cardinal German, stern, eyes like stone, stood and said what the rest had only thought. If the Holy Father does not denounce this man, he denounces the Church. The room fell silent. No one spoke against him, because in truth, they all feared the same thing. Not that the Pope was guilty, but that he cared too much. Inside his private quarters, Pope Leo XIV stared at his reflection. His face was thinner, paler. The bags beneath his eyes looked heavier than his crown. He had given his entire life to this church, to its rituals, its people, its silence. But this was the first time he truly felt alone. Even the crucifix above his bed seemed to look away. He thought of writing a homily, something humble, something clear. But every sentence felt like betrayal. If he condemned Michael outright, he would be praised. And yet, it would be a lie, because he had not condemned him in his heart. Because he remembered the boy who once kneeled beside him at Mass with hands so small they couldn't hold the rosary properly. Because he remembered the time Michael stole a can of soup and cried for an hour afterward. Because, even now, some part of him believed Michael wasn't lost, just wounded. But the Church had no patience for wounds, only for appearances. The following Sunday, he stood at the window above St. Peter's Square for the Angelus. Tens of thousands filled the piazza. More cameras than ever. More silence than ever. He prayed, gave blessings, but he did not mention the name they all waited to hear. Michael. That night, his silence became the loudest statement of all. Pundits tore it apart. By refusing to speak, the Pope has chosen his family over his flock. It's a spiritual betrayal. A holy man who's forgotten the meaning of truth. He turned off the TV. He couldn't sleep. He paced the halls like a ghost, passing tapestries and marble busts, until he reached the old chapel. There he dropped to his knees. No robe, no crown, just a man. He looked up at Christ, crucified, and whispered, "I am not ashamed of him, but I am ashamed of what they need me to become." The stone echoed nothing back. No voice from heaven. No burning bush. No divine comfort. Only the flicker of a candle. And the sound of his own breath trembling in the dark. The letters kept coming. Some were furious. Others heartbreaking. Many were just confused. From Argentina, "Holy Father, my son is in prison too. Do you still bless us?" From India, "You taught us that Jesus forgave the thief on the cross. Will you now deny your own cousin?" From Chicago, "My faith was strong, now it shakes like a leaf." He read them all. Each envelope opened by hand. Each page unfolded carefully. Each word read in full. Because if they were brave enough to write, he owed them the dignity of listening. The marble walls of the Apostolic Palace had never felt so heavy. The paintings of saints stared down with eyes too perfect to understand. Even the air seemed to whisper doubt. Cardinal Visconti returned. This time, he did not sit. "Robert," he said. Using the name only a handful still dared to speak. The Pope looked up. "We cannot wait much longer. The people are turning. I know. They need clarity. They want a spectacle." The Cardinal hesitated, then placed a folder on the desk. Inside, transcripts of every broadcast, every headline, every insult. One page, in bold. "If the Pope won't choose between God and blood, maybe he's not worthy of either." Robert closed the folder without a word. "Do you think they're right?" he asked softly. Visconti did not answer. because silence had become his answer too. That night, Robert sat by the fountain in the Vatican gardens. He wore no cassock, just black slacks and a plain white shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows like he was anyone else. He watched the water spill over stone, rhythm steady, endless. He thought about quitting. Not the church. The silence. He thought about walking to the nearest microphone and telling the truth. That he missed his cousin. That he didn't know what was right anymore. That maybe being holy didn't mean being loud. It meant being human. But then what? What would the church do with a human pope? He stood, walked slowly back to his chambers, stopped by the door. Inside, on the desk, the phone was blinking. A message. He sat, pressed play. A voice, hesitant, American, female. "My name is Grace Callahan. I'm Michael's daughter." He froze. "I don't know if you'll listen to this. My dad didn't want me to call, but I had to. I've seen the news. I've seen your face. And I just wanted to say, please don't hate him." Her voice cracked. "He didn't do it for money. He did it for me." The message ended there. No details. No story. Just a single thread. And suddenly, the silence cracked. Not completely, but enough for something to breathe. The Pope stared at the phone, then whispered, "Grace." He didn't sleep, didn't pray, just sat in the chair until dawn painted the walls gold. And when the sun rose, for the first time in weeks, he made a call to a journalist, a friend, and said 4 words, "Tell me the truth." The journalist's name was Andrew Bell. He'd covered the Vatican for over 20 years. Respected, methodical, not easily swayed by sentiment. When the Pope called him personally, he thought it was a mistake. But it wasn't. Robert didn't say much. Just this: "They're telling the wrong story. I need the right one." Andrew was already working on it. He'd been digging past the mugshots and headlines, trying to understand why a man with no gang ties, no history of violence, no clear profit motive, would risk everything for something so small. And now he had found it. Grace Callahan, 6 years old, bright eyes, a quiet voice that faded when she breathed too fast. Diagnosis: Tay-Sachs, a rare inherited disorder. Relentless, expensive, almost always fatal. She was admitted to a children's hospital in Columbus 2 years ago. Her mother, Michael's ex-wife, had abandoned the family after the first seizure. Too much pain, too much cost. Michael had worked nights in a warehouse, then days at a loading dock. Still, the bills came. $20,000, then 30, then more. One night, a man from his past appeared, offered him a way out. Small deliveries. No names, no weapons. Just boxes. Michael said no. The next week, the hospital called. Insurance refused the latest treatment. He called the man back. 3 months later, he was arrested in a parking lot. 3 grams of cocaine. 1 wire. 1 confession. When Andrew printed the article, he didn't sensationalize it. He called it what it was: a father's crime. Why Michael Callahan risked prison to keep his daughter breathing. It ran in major outlets. And something shifted. Not in the church, but in the people. Comments began to appear beneath the hateful headlines. "I'd do the same for my child. Maybe this isn't a scandal. Maybe it's a tragedy." He broke the law, but not because he wanted to. He broke because the world did first. At the Vatican, the cardinals remained silent. But the Pope wasn't watching them anymore. He was watching Grace. Footage emerged of her in a hospital bed, coloring quietly. Oxygen tube beneath her nose. A stuffed lamb beside her. When asked what she wanted to be, she whispered, "A bird, so I can fly to my dad." The Pope sat in his study, hands trembling over the newspaper. He had read hundreds of stories, seen millions of faces, but none had undone him like this one. He stood, walked to the chapel, and fell to his knees, not as Pope, as Robert, as Robbie. The boy who once shared a bed with Michael. The boy who promised never to forget. And now, he had to choose. Condemnation or compassion. Doctrine or blood. Silence or voice. He lit a candle, whispered a prayer, and stood. Tomorrow, he would speak. The next Sunday, St. Peter's Square overflowed. Not with tourists. Not with ceremony. But with expectation. The rumors had spread fast. The Pope would speak. And this time, not in riddles. Cameras from every nation framed the balcony. Tens of thousands watched in silence. Millions more from screens across the world. At exactly noon, Pope Leo XIV stepped forward. He wore the white robes, the papal ring, the solemn expression. But something in his eyes was different. Softer, raw. He didn't begin with greetings, or prayers, or tradition. He simply looked into the sea of faces and said, "I have spent weeks in silence, not out of fear, but out of grief." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Michael Callahan is my cousin, but more than Thaith is the boy I grew up with, the boy who shared my bread, my prayers, my childhood. The camera zoomed in. He has committed a crime, that is true, and he must face the law. That is also true. But behind the law, there is a child, his daughter, sick, fragile, and clinging to life. This world often punishes desperation as if it were evil, but I will not condemn a man for refusing to let his daughter die. Silence. Not a whisper in the square. I do not excuse his actions, but I understand them, and I believe God understands them too. Because if mercy is only for the innocent, then none of us deserve it. He paused. The wind carried his words like scripture. Some of you are angry. Some of you are confused. Some of you feel betrayed, and I carry that weight with you. But let us remember, the man who founded our church denied Christ 3 times, and yet he was chosen to lead. We are not made holy by never failing. We are made holy by rising after we fall. He looked down, took a breath. Michael Callahan will serve his sentence. That is justice. But his daughter Grace will not be forgotten. The Vatican will cover the cost of her treatment, not as a political gesture, not as a scandal's bandage, but as a cousin, as a man, as someone who once promised to never leave family behind. This is not a press release, it is a confession. And I pray, as I stand before you now, that we remember who we are, broken people trying to love in a broken world. He raised his hand in blessing. May mercy guide us, may justice humble us, and may love above all be louder than fear. Then he stepped back. No applause, no music, just stillness. And then, a single voice in the crowd. Amen. Then another. Amen. Until the entire squaretons of thousands echoed it like thunder. Amen. It was raining in Ohio. Not a storm, not a downpour. Just a soft, steady drizzle that blurred the prison gates like a curtain of memory. The papal motorcade did not arrive in full. No sirens, no flags, no cameras. Just one black car, one assistant, one man in white. Pope Leo XIV stepped out under a plain black umbrella. His white cassock dampened instantly at the hem. He walked slowly. No guards flanked him. No one cleared the way. At the entrance, a correctional officer stared in disbelief. "Identification?" he asked, unsure whether to salute or step aside. The Pope didn't answer. He simply handed over a sealed document, cleared by the state. The officer nodded. "This way, Your Holiness." He was led through 2 metal detectors, 3 locked doors, and a hallway that smelled of bleach and defeat. The walls were pale green, the kind of color that tried to look hopeful but had given up decades ago. Finally, they reached a small visitation room. No glass, no microphones, just 2 chairs and a table. The Pope sat first, then waited. Minutes passed. Then the door opened again. Michael Callahan entered. No chains, no guards at his side. He wore a gray prison shirt, His hair was shorter, his eyes were older, but his posture restive, proud, defiant, was exactly as Robert remembered it. They stared at each other. No words. Just the hum of the ceiling light overhead. Michael was the first to break. "Didn't think you'd come." The Pope didn't answer. "You shouldn't be here," Michael said. "You've got a world to impress." "I'm not here as the Pope," Robert said softly. "I'm here as Robbie." Michael scoffed. "That kid's long gone." "No," Robert replied. "Just quiet." Michael sat, arms crossed, eyes locked on the floor. For a moment, they said nothing. Then Robert pulled something from his sleeve. A photograph. 2 boys, barefoot, holding a football, laughing. He placed it on the table. Michael didn't look at it. Robert leaned forward. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. Michael didn't answer. "You disappeared, and I thought you hated me." "I did," Michael said. The Pope blinked. "I hated that you got out, that you got holy, that everyone bowed to you while I faded." He finally looked up. "But I didn't hate you because of what you did. I hated you because you left." The words sliced through the room like broken glass. "I didn't mean to leave," Robert whispered. "But you did." Another silence. This time heavier, denser. "I never stopped thinking about you," Robert said. Michael nodded, bitter. "I tapped that stupid lamp for years." Michael blinked. 3 taps, Robert said. "Still here." Michael looked at him, and for the first time, his jaw softened. His eyes filled. "You remember that?" "I never forgot." Michael leaned back, covered his face with his hands, breathing unsteady. Robert let him sit in the silence. Then he reached across the table, slowly, open palm. Michael stared at the hand. Didn't move. Then, like muscle memory too old to resist, he raised his own and tapped 3 times. Still here. Tears fell from both men. No ceremony. No absolution. Just 2 boys, older now, broken differently, but still connected by something deeper than blood. Time. Michael wiped his eyes with the sleeve of his shirt. His hands were calloused, dirt under the nails. A man shaped by labor, shame, and quiet battles no one saw. He looked at Robert, not the robes, not the ring, not the crown of gold people imagined when they pictured the Pope. Just Robert. Robbie. The one who used to read him bedtime psalms in a whisper. "You really came," Michael said. "I had to. I told them not to contact you." "I know. But Grace did." Robert smiled gently. "She has your stubbornness." Michael laughed through his nose, then lowered his head. "I didn't want you to see me like this." "I've seen worse," Robert said. Michael looked up, confused. "I've seen men kill for power, smile while hurting others, preach mercy while choking on pride. You? You broke trying to save someone. I'll take that over false holiness any day." Michael exhaled, long and slow. "I'm going to prison. For a long time." "Yes," Robert said, "because justice is not a favor, and you knew the cost." Michael nodded. "I'd do it again," he whispered. Robert reached into his robe again. This time, he took out a folded letter. "She wrote you something." Michael stared. "Grace?" Robert slid it across the table. Michael hesitated, then unfolded it. Crayon scribbles, a drawing of a man with brown hair and a beard holding hands with a small girl under a sun. The words, messy but clear. "I miss you, Daddy. The Pope says you're still good. I believe him." Michael covered his mouth. No tears this time. Just a soundless ache that filled his chest like fire. "I don't deserve her." "No," Robert said. "But love doesn't wait for us to be ready. It shows up anyway." They sat in silence again. Then Robert leaned in. "I want to help." Michael shook his head. "You've done enough." "No," Robert said firmly. "Not as Pope, as her uncle." Michael looked up, stunned. "I'll make sure she's cared for, that she has everything she needs, not because the world is watching, but because she's family." Michael swallowed hard. I can't repay that. You don't have to. They sat there, two men surrounded by walls and locks and rules. But in that moment, none of it mattered. The past had already broken them. But the future was still unwritten. I forgive you, Robert said softly. Michael blinked. For leaving, for staying silent, for making me do the same. Michael nodded. I forgive you too. For what? For surviving. Robert stood. So did Michael. They didn't hug. They didn't shake hands. They just looked at each other. Two men who had shared a bedroom, a lamp, and 1,000 small memories that the world had tried to erase. As Robert turned to leave, Michael spoke once more. Hey, 3 taps, right? Robert paused, then smiled without turning back. Still here. And then he walked out, white robe trailing behind him, disappearing into the rain that had just begun again. The Children's Hospital in Columbus stood pale against the gray morning sky. No banners, no press, just nurses who worked too hard, and children who fought too quietly. Pope Leo XIV entered through the back. No camera crew, no announcement. Only a doctor and a chaplain walked with him, their voices low and reverent. In room 213, the walls were painted with stars. Faded stickers of cartoon angels watched over IV poles and oxygen tanks. Grace lay small in her bed, smaller than the world could bear. A patch of hair missing from the treatments. Eyes too big for a face so thin. She was coloring when he entered. A sun, a bird, a field. Always skies, always flight. She looked up and smiled. You're real, she whispered. I am, he replied, kneeling beside her bed. You talk funny. Robert laughed. It's the hat, he said, removing his zucchetto and setting it on her stuffed lamb. Grace giggled, then coughed softly. He waited for her to catch her breath, then gently took her hand. I knew your daddy when we were your age, he said. She looked at him with wide eyes. We used to sleep in the same room. He always stole my blankets. She smiled again. He said you were smart. He said that? Robert asked, feigning surprise. She nodded, serious now. He said you were brave too, and sad. The words sat heavy in the air. Robert didn't deflect. I was sad. For a long time. Because I lost him. She squeezed his fingers. But now you found him again. He nodded. I did. Outside the window, rain tapped softly. Inside, machines hummed. Nurses passed. The world spun on. But in that room, time paused. Grace looked at her drawing. This bird, she said, it's me. Robert tilted his head. I'm gonna fly one day. He swallowed the lump in his throat. You already are. She pointed to the sun in the corner. That's you. I made you shine over everything. Tears burned behind his eyes. But he didn't let them fall. He just nodded. Then pulled a small silver medallion from his pocket. It was old. Worn. He placed it in her palm. What's this? She asked. It was mine a long time ago. My cousin gave it to me, said it would keep me safe. Did it? He smiled. It brought me back to you. So yes. She closed her fingers around it like it was treasure. A nurse entered quietly. Grace's next treatment would begin soon. Robert stood. But before he left, she spoke again. You'll come back? He looked into her eyes and said, I'll always be nearby. Then he placed a kiss on her forehead, walked to the door, and turned back one last time. She had resumed her coloring. Wings, skies, light. The last thing he heard as he stepped out was her soft voice saying, Still here. That night, the Pope sat at his desk in silence. The lamp cast a soft pool of light over parchment and pen. He had sent his aides away. No meetings. No statements. No interruptions. Just ink. And memory. He picked up the pen, wrote slowly, carefully. To Grace, if you are reading this many years from now, I hope the world has been kind, I hope your wings have grown. I want you to know that your Father is loved by you, by me, and by a God who sees beyond failure. This world is loud with judgment, but heaven listens to hearts, and your Father's heart, though bruised, never stopped beating for you. He is not the crime he committed. He's the love he carried. He paused, let the ink dry, then continued. There are many kinds of prisons, some built with walls, others with pride, and the hardest to escape are made of silence. He looked up, eyes wet, then signed. Robert, your uncle, your friend, your light watcher. He folded the letter, sealed it with wax, and stood. His footsteps echoed softly through the empty marble corridors. Paintings of saints and martyrs lined the halls like silent witnesses. He entered the chapel, lit only by candlelight, the same chapel where he had once dropped to his knees in shame. Now he came with something else. Peace. He knelt, not to ask, not to beg, but to thank. For grace, for truth, for the second chances that no doctrine could explain, but every soul understood. He whispered one name, Michael, and then, still here, he remained there until the flame on the last candle flickered low. And when he stood, the stars outside had begun to pierce the Roman sky. The next morning, he gave no speech, no interviews. He simply walked into St. Peter's Basilica and sat in the back pew. A woman in a shawl sat beside him, didn't recognize him. She offered him a small rosary. He smiled and accepted it. And together, without knowing each other's names, they prayed.